invite the next panel to start right away. So we're going to shift to a discussion around how we strengthen the Arctic information environment. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Andrew Heffernan. I think many of you know him already. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa, but most importantly, he is the climate associate of the Information Integrity Lab, and has been a good transition from the first part of the conference on climate security to this conference, focusing more on the geopolitics and mis and disinformation. And he's accompanied by Madeleine Redfern. He's the Chief Operating Officer at CanArctic Inuit Network. Chris Russill, been a key partner. Those of you who don't know, there's sometimes a little rivalry between University of Ottawa and Carleton University. Not in this case. We work very closely with Chris Russill in his capacity as associate professor, but also, most importantly, from our perspective, he's the director of ReClimate. And Samu, you're going to forgive me in advance for mispronouncing your name, I'm sure. Samu Paukkunen? Perfect. Roughly right? He's from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and I know Finland has come up quite a few times in this discussion, but he's here in his capacity as the head of the climate and energy security in NATO. And so we look forward to hearing from your NATO perspectives. We know things have changed in terms of its recognition of climate change, perhaps, and welcome the latest from Brussels on that perspective. And Andrew, I put this in your good hands.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you all for still being here. I realize that we are the last thing standing, not only between you and lunch, but you and the end of this conference. So we will try to keep things fairly tight on the timeline. Everyone's going to start off with, I've asked the presenters to give very short introductory presentations, 5 to 7 minutes. I've got some useful cards here, which I'll start waving more vigorously as we get towards the end. I will have some follow-up questions as well, which I'll ask to keep responses fairly brief, because I do want to hear from the audience. As Bruno mentioned yesterday, we've had a wealth of really great questions at this conference. But with that, I will invite Madeleine to start off with her introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. I am from Inuit, the capital of Nunavut, and thank you for inviting me. Maybe I'm going to take a slightly different approach than what has been presented this morning, in so much as part of what is absolutely required is the digital infrastructure in order to be able to actually address the issues regarding getting baseline data for climate change and climate change monitoring in real time, as well as, of course, the necessity of that digital infrastructure for the purposes of telecommunications, not only internally within our communities, our region, but connecting us with the rest of the world. In addition, of course, on the topic of misinformation and disinformation, I've highlighted in a number of different venues maybe the unintended consequence of the federal legislation that prevents the sharing of mainstream media on social media. Most of our people are on social media and don't have always the necessary financial resources to pay for the subscriptions of mainstream media, and as such there is a significant amount of misinformation and disinformation that circulates in our communities, especially regarding what's happening outside of our regions. When I was back home recently, of course, there was good familiarity about the United States and the Trump administration's, interest in the Arctic, but in particular with respect to Greenland, but maybe not as much with other information. And then maybe to, very briefly touch upon the necessity of having this digital infrastructure as well to support security and defense. We need to be able to have that real-time data as it relates to knowing what is happening in our region, especially as it relates not only to having the satellite services that is mixed in quality, in so much as that we see that or we know that Telesat's geos are coming out of commission very soon. And of course, there's some concerns regarding the ownership and potentially the compromising service as it relates to Elon Musk. And therefore not really having much redundancy in much of Canada's Arctic with respect to that. There's very limited subsea fiber. There's some that has been built in and around Nunavik, which is the northern part of Quebec, but there is no subsea fiber that effectively is connected to the World Wide Web for almost all of Canada's Arctic region. That includes Baffin Island, through the Northwest Passage. There is fiber, terrestrial fiber, of course, that goes up through Northwest Territories, and there's redundancy there, but there is also vulnerabilities. The other, opportunity that comes with having subsea fiber integrated with satellite is the necessity of building the ground facilities that then could and should be connected to the data centers that actually would allow that data processing to happen in our regions. I think most people understand there's tremendous costs associated with data centers. I see the yellow card coming up. And being in the Arctic allows the cost of powering that to be less, but that does also equally require us to actually find the energy solutions, because data centers generally can't and shouldn't be probably run on fossil fuels and or on renewables, especially the volume of data and the processing that requires. We need, significant energy solutions. Greenland's lucky, as much as of the Nordic countries that have access to either hydroelectric power. So we also need to be looking at the energy solutions that actually supports the digital infrastructure. So maybe in closing is that Canada has a lot to do in determining where its strategic priorities can and should be. It's great to talk about these topics as it relates to information, geopolitics, disinformation, misinformation, but if you don't have the digital infrastructure in Canada's Arctic, you are going to not only not achieve what's needed and necessary for all domain awareness, but it also means that we are not going to be supporting our communities in the way that they could and should for the full economic benefits that stem from having this fundamental and basic infrastructure, but also, as many in this room and others have known, is that data is the new oil. And we need to have data sovereignty. We need to be able to use that data for evidence decision making, whether it is in the area of research or it is in the area of security and defense. Thank you.
No, thank you. One of the things that we're going to try to really do with this panel, as Alex already alluded to, is solve all of the questions and complex challenges that we've been talking to throughout today and the past couple days. And I really like how you've pointed to so many avenues we can start pursuing for solutions, right? I think we've talked about how the fact that there is a lot of reason for pessimism. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of challenges, but certainly, and especially at the Information Integrity Lab, we are really thinking about solutions and how we can move the needles on this. So thank you, Madeleine, for talking about so many avenues we can start to pursue, and we will start fleshing through that a bit further as this panel goes on. But before we get into any further questions, Sam?
Thank you, Andrew. Would love to. And thanks for having me here. It was a bit of a hassle, but finally I made it here. I'm just sad that I lost the first part of the discussions. I heard that it was quite an interesting topic that you went over here. But I know that you're all aware of the impacts of global warming, on the impacts of our security, on the safety of the people. And this, of course, applies to NATO as such. NATO is not outside of the realm of impacts of global warming. It has both direct and indirect impacts. And from the direct ones, I could start by referring to the black flag days, the number of extremely hot days that are going to limit our operations and our capabilities when the helos are not able to operate in such hot conditions. The same applies, of course, on the sea domain, that due to the global warming, we need to really plan better ahead. If we think that the acquisition and the lifespan of a frigate is around 50 to 60 years, we really need to be aware of all the scenarios of warming trends, because it is massive difference between 1.5, 2.7 and 4.0. And we already have evidence that some of the nations have had to go back to the drawing boards simply because they were not aware of the pace of the change in a way that they were preparing, they were planning based on the information that was solid 5 years ago, but that's not the case anymore. And these are tangible, real-life effects of the global warming that we really need to take seriously. And of course, it's also about strategic competition and adversaries in a way that as we are adapting to this new security situation, so are they. Russia is quite advanced in operating in the cold and harsh environment in the Arctic, a topic, of course, of this panel. China is building that capacity as we speak. And many of the allies are planning to update their capacities. So we are seeing a change in this regard, that there's going to be more activities in the Arctic region. And this is actually the segue for the actual information-related topics that I was planning to address in this panel. In a way that if information, if awareness are the key and the cornerstones of us being able to adapt to the new environment, it needs to be solid. But in this, there's also few occasions that we've seen that strategic competition is now covering all fields. After the illegal accession of the aggression of Ukraine, we saw that on the following day, the Western scientists were pushed out of all of the Russian Arctic research bases. And the following day of that, they were replaced on many occasions with the Chinese scientists. And then we also understood that we are not getting any more of the information that is needed for the IPCC reporting, for the modeling of the climate data, by which the governments themselves are then basing their decisions upon. And this is a really sad situation. But it's also a situation that isn't being addressed publicly as much as at least I would want it to be addressed. The other topic directly linked to disinformation, misinformation, is also the way that how Russia is seeing the energy transition. That the green transition, that the energy transition that is going to be more electricity and where Russia is going to be the biggest loser is actually a thing that they have been trying to use against us. And that's the basis of much of the Russian misinformation on energy. They stand to lose so much if the European states are able to do the transition, if the decoupling of the Russian oil and gas is done, and if solar, wind, batteries are going to replace that they have been ramping up their operations to make sure that there are question marks, that people would question the feasibility of this transition. But I'll keep it at these two examples, but I think it's just a showcase that it is an area of massive competition. It is an area of competition where we are not on day-to-day basis aware of all the developments. And this is why I also appreciate all of these possibilities for us to engage in these kinds of formats, to exchange information, to share our views, and maybe to learn also from each other. But thank you.
Yes, thank you for those comments. A lot more to think about as well as we're thinking about these questions of solutions to the complex problems that are out there. One of the follow-up questions that I'm going to have as well are about the actors that are involved, both contributing to the problems and then thinking about what kind of actors we should be leveraging to contribute to solutions as well. So certainly a number of things to follow up there as well. But before that, Chris, if you can offer some introductory remarks for what you're thinking about as well.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for everyone for being here on this important topic. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting my participation again and putting me among such smart and serious people to discuss this, and to Alex and Andrew as well. I've heard a few people say that they're not Arctic experts, but I'm really not an Arctic expert. Emphasize under really there, but I do come at this question from the position of climate disinformation. It won't surprise anyone to know that disinformation is endemic to climate conversations. It's worse than ever before, I would say. It's worsening, and it will continue to degrade because our information environment is degrading. This is in large part because of the incentives and the affordances of the digital systems that organize our access and interaction with that environment, and how those are leveraged by actors that are seeking influence on a whole range of conversations, and doing so without any cost being imposed upon them when they are noticed, when they are recorded, when they are caught, when they are called out, that type of thing. So there are technical architecture aspects of this that reflect the business models of very large digital platforms, and the fact that there's really no interest or capacity to impose costs, as I've discussed, on people that act in this way. And so until that sort of thing happens, we will continue to be in this situation, and it will continue to worsen as the climate conversation progresses. How climate people tend to come at this, it's a story of sprawl. We really saw systematic disinformation targeting climate scientists, climate science, and scientific institutions. So very much a story of science that organized systematically in a very obvious and well-documented way in the 1990s. However, since then, we have seen disinformation sprawl from science and scientists and scientific institutions into climate policy discussions, into climate solution discussions, into climate impact discussions, into climate action discussions of all kinds, involving governments, advocates, activists, anyone really who begins to talk publicly about this in an impactful way. So how do we think about these kinds of things? One is the sprawl of content, which can seem very disorienting. We have the weather weapons that we talk about, tons of this stuff that we documented in our wildfire and misinformation report of a couple years ago, just escalated almost exponentially with the LA fires and the stuff we have seen in there. So it's continuing to develop, and it can feel very chaotic and disorienting, as if we don't really know how to get our bearings in this as we begin to aggregate and just document what is happening. However, beneath that, there is a clear consistency in terms of the actors, the strategies or playbook, if you wanted to talk about it in that way, and the basic story they tell to try to erode trust and legitimacy of governments and people that are acting in this space. The other place this is sprawled beyond content and issues-based management is in the platforms themselves. So we heard about Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all Meta, X, which used to be Twitter, of course, YouTube. These are just the very large platforms. So it's a much more hybrid and fragmented information environment now, which again can make this feel like it's sprawling and very difficult to understand if you don't see the consistency underneath this, which is really a small group of actors leveraging these affordances and incentives to gain outsized influence for their voices, and on occasion to mobilize people en masse and in mobs to act at pivotal times. So what does that mean for the kinds of things that will happen in the Arctic? Well, as you know, I'm really not an Arctic expert, but I think there's three areas that are at least worth attending to in my mind. One is this questions of impacts. We've seen the erosion, the active undermining in the US alone with NASA and NOAA and some of the scientists that contribute to impacts assessments. I was really It was really nice to hear on the first panel that there are good people, Jackie was talking about, continuing to document and do this science, so maybe I don't have to be as nervous as I was before, but the erosion and eradication of just the science of that impacts study makes me wonder where it will go. Will it go into the financial sector, into the insurance sector, into countries that no longer want to share these things? I think that's a real concern. Thank you, Andrew. I'll be very brief with the last two comments. The second is this question of digital infrastructure, and as we build this kind of thing out, are we talking about Starlink or are we talking about Canary? Those would be two very different models, and I'm guessing you have some ideas about models, and can we collaborate and co-produce perhaps a different model for that infrastructure, but certainly for the digital networks that are going to deliver content to these communities. Embedding the one we have is simply to buy into more and more of the disinformation we're seeing. So beginning to fold that concern into that conversation might be productive, but again, emphasizing I'm really not an expert in these communities and in these areas. The third piece that I think is worth taking some notice of is the very large, I would say, meta-narrative, if you will, in which a lot of our conversations around climate land is shifting. It's been very relatively stable over the last 20 to 25 years in mainstream conversations, and it has really been, on the one hand, science-led, with scientists and scientific organizations carrying a message of crisis and urgency forward in a very data-based and evidence-based way. Climate crisis, climate catastrophe, climate emergency, these are variants, but within that broad narrative. And on the other hand, you've seen a carbon economics narrative basically since the Stern Review of 2006, which is a very different one where economics leads that narrative, trying to talk about how the costs of inaction are worse than the cost of acting on climate change, and beginning to work through the economics of the energy transition as perhaps an inexorable economic force that moves forward. Both of those have been destabilized in very serious ways over the last little while. People in this country know this, having gone through kind of a carbon tax election, but looking at the ways in which carbon pricing and carbon taxes became polarized. There is a third narrative, though, and I noted that when our new Prime Minister was elected, he came to his speech with a meme, and his meme was "Build, Baby, Build." And that's a narrative where climate action is embedded within industrial policy in the service of nation building. And so you see here Canada becoming, the idea of Canada and its unity or division being a topic in which climate conversations will be embedded. And those will certainly be targeted by actors with, I would suggest, adversarial intentions, but certainly be targeted with false and misleading information around our energy politics, looking to amplify and to exacerbate that situation. That will certainly, everyone already knows about this, but I have to think that this will continue to be a place where that will happen. And the Arctic in this imaginary will appear, I think, as more central because of some of the stories we've heard today, where Southerners like us are taking in narratives around resource extraction, resource competition perhaps, integrated supply chains. I'm sure all those things will move, but I think that big story will become a place in which the climate conversations, it'll exert a gravity, if I can put it that way. So I'll stop there, but thank you again for this invitation and your attention today.
Yes, and thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for remaining disciplined and on time. Very interesting opening remarks. So much to chew on there. I myself don't do a ton of the Arctic, so I'm excited to be up here. What I do a lot of is climate disinformation, and I've told a few people that, and they kind of laugh and they make it sound like I am out there sowing the climate disinformation, which I can assure you, all right, at least don't think I am. But I do have a few follow-up questions, and everybody was really disciplined and staying on time. So I want to start with a bit of a lightning round of sorts. When I do tell people that I work on climate disinformation, they usually want some sort of straightforward answer, like how do we go about fixing that? And like a good academic or pracademic, I cannot give any simple, concise, or straightforward answers to these kinds of questions. I don't know if they exist, but one of the great things about being a moderator is I can try to force you all to do so. So in this lightning round, I'd like you to all distill the number one thing in a very short time, the number one thing we can and should be doing about, as the title of this panel suggests, strengthening the Arctic information environment. What is the number one thing that we can and should be doing about it? And who should be in charge of managing whatever that type of solution is? And maybe we'll start at the far end with Chris and work our way back this way.
Start with the non-expert. The one place I would think about is there is really no reason not to regulate large technology platforms for transparency and accountability, as the EU has done very effectively. There's no other real industrial sector in which they can visit harms upon society and simply absolve themselves of accountability for that. And there's no reason why that sort of model can't apply here. This isn't about censoring content. It's about making visible the decisions they make in terms of what they amplify or what they choose to shadow ban, as you might say, how they assess risks, how they act on them, and making it possible for independent organizations and researchers to monitor and understand and make available to everybody what is happening in that information environment. Right now, it's completely opaque. It's never been worse due to some of the changes that Madeleine pointed to in terms of what Meta has done. But Meta is just one organization that has really pulled back and shut independent researchers out of this space. So I would say we don't be squishy about that. That involves a tech policy conversation that happens, and that's the kind of thing that I think can have a very profound impact on what might not be a completely solvable problem, but isn't something that's just so hopelessly complex that we can't really react on this issue. So that's kind of what I would throw into the mix.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I do appreciate that conversation. It's not something we've talked about the last couple days, that question of the tech bros and where they fall into all this, but certainly something we should be considering, I think. Madeleine?
So we're in a really bizarre situation where there is definitely Arctic climate change research being done, but it is in some ways, it's very sporadic. It's very sort of specific, often to one place, one species. I also just want to speak to the fact that there is a huge absence of marine data in Canada's Arctic. It is seriously, sort of lack of subsea mapping, lack of, baseline data, and yet we are making decisions, in that area, or it's easier to, sort of exaggerate information in one area and try to say it's applicable to all. So maybe I just want to share a couple of examples and challenge one statement that was made earlier. I recall back in 2008 when there was the successful effort to uplist polar bears as endangered in the United States. There was a lot of misinformation and disinformation, done to effectively advance, sort of the climate change agenda. We knew it was serious, and when, back then it was stated by the polar bear scientists that polar bears would be extinct by 2025, and here we are, they are not extinct. And Inuit knowledge around that would, push back and say that polar bears, just similar to humans, are adaptive. So again, we see a lot of misinformation, disinformation around the Arctic climate change issues, whether it is the melting, ice. At the same time, as a former politician, it would piss me off how often even, not just Western scientists or government bureaucrats, sort of using a piece of science and not understanding that while the ice is melting at the same time is that we're actually seeing a drought and a decrease in the amount of precipitation, which has led to, like, the city of Iqaluit calling a state of emergency, which has led to Yellowknife actually and Whitehorse having to rely on diesel for backup generation because there's not sufficient precipitation for their hydro dams. So again, we need to be really careful about, the fact of where we have science, how it's being analyzed and used appropriately or not appropriately, and as a result it is influencing sort of policy and or decisions that sometimes are actually not accurate. And so to speak to your request on what is the solution is that there actually needs to be an increase exchange of information from the Arctic about the Arctic, recognizing that some of our northern Indigenous peoples have immense expertise in some areas, but are not necessarily the experts of information in all areas. So we have to be prepared to understand and accept that there are biases, there are expertise, and sometimes there's a mismatch between that. So we need to be comfortable calling out misinformation and disinformation on both sides and figure out how to get that missing data and how to appropriately analyze that data so we make good decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really like the emphasis you place on exchange, right? I think that, going back to how I sort of posed this question and it being so difficult to simplify down to one thing, I think we all need to come at these very difficult questions and challenges from a place of humility and realizing that none of us have the answer or the solution, and that we really do need to work in partnership and build on and exchange various types of information to be able to start working towards some version of solutions for strengthening that information environment.
I think one solution would be to make the issue visible, whether it's misinformation or disinformation, or whether it's about Russia withholding information. You have to make it visible. You have to publicize it. You have to bring it to the fold in a way that it cannot be addressed in the darkness and only with the governments. And it is an issue also affecting the whole global population. It is not having an impact only on the Arctic, as Russia is withholding that information. That information, that data is needed for all of humankind. And this is an issue that could and should be addressed in a much more detailed manner than thus far.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm going to follow up and continue this lightning round, and maybe we'll go in reverse order again. Samu, if you want to start. So we've talked about what we can and should be doing and who should be doing that. I want to kind of flip that question as someone, again, who kind of has been studying climate disinformation for some time. I'm very cognizant of some of the contradictions with trying to deal with mis and disinformation. I think that so many of the them out there who want to embrace mis or disinformation don't want to be told what is proper information versus malinformation versus mis versus dis and so on. And this has inherent contradictions in either the government or academics or experts trying to kind of govern the information space, which is extremely fraught in general, obviously. So this puts a lot of challenges into trying to deal with this. So I want to follow up with another lightning round of what should we not be doing? What kind of things have we been pursuing that can be more problematic, that have demonstrated to maybe increase the polarization or further fan the flames of disinformation and some of the cascading effects that we've been seeing across the Arctic and more broadly across the information integrity ecosystem globally? Samu, if you want to start off on that very simple question again.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. This was an easy one. I think we do not have possibility to enact in a way that action is only possibility for us in revealing this misinformation, disinformation. So if we just let it pass, if we just don't ignore it, it's not solving the problem. It needs to be addressed, and of course here lies the issue. The massive resources needed for this, the amount of additional research that validates the existing research needed to be done to make sure that we stay on the path of producing knowledge, information that is then challenging the misinformation, disinformation. Massive endeavor, but I'm hoping, actually I know that my colleagues on the panel are having also answers for this.
Yes, thank you very much. Madeleine, you want to share some thoughts on that?
So I would say that, and it was highlighted earlier, we have so many sort of different actors or parties that are involved in the issue, disconnected from each other. There's silos in our federal government. There's silos or separations, you know, between different levels of government. There's academia, you know, sometimes working on its own, sometimes working with industry and business, which we didn't actually mention either. And so there are many different sort of agendas as well in each of those, you know, sort of business interests trying to push, you know, of course, solutions which are not always the most appropriate ones, but yet there are good businesses that are working research and or with government, but it's too fragmented. And as such, there's also a lot of, you know, sort of research or decisions or projects that are being pushed that are maybe not the most strategic ones, and yet, of course, you know, are costly in the Arctic. And as such, we end up seeing missed opportunities or in not strategic investments that really address, you know, the issue of not only the infrastructure that gets built, but also the policies or the priorities that get developed. We need to recognize that, you know, while we often, or I often hear that the solutions are in the north for the north, that's not always the case. We don't know what we don't know. Ottawa doesn't know what it doesn't know. Sectors don't know what they don't know. And so what's not working is the fact that it is way too fragmented, and that really is not going to get us where we need to get to if we're going to look at finding those solutions.
Yeah, thank you. And I think so many interesting and important points to think about there. I mean, throughout the morning we heard about the need to invest more in the Arctic, but we know that there are limited resources, limited political buy-in from the people of Canada and from politicians. And I think we have to be careful with those resources to make sure that we are really locating them and centralizing them on things that are going to be effective, ideally, but certainly not things that can be you know, counterproductive and push back against so many of the goals that we do need to realize with those very limited resources. Chris, some thoughts on what we should not be doing as well?
Yeah, and great question. So I work with a group called ReClimate, which we founded at Carleton University, and its focus is climate communication and public engagement. And people usually come to us when everything else has failed, and so you kind of reach for communication as the solution to try to make things work. And a lot of times that reach is like, what do I say? What do I say to kind of overcome this fragmentation? What do I say to people that misunderstand me? What do I say with a kind of message-oriented focus? And I think the first rule of climate communication is it's not what you say, it's how you are heard. And so really thinking about how you are heard and coming forward with what I would say is narrative-based public engagement, if you do that work, is a crucial thing. Stories are the ways in which many different ways of knowing can come together more easily than a science-led mode of public engagement. So I know many times we want to come forward with our knowledge because it's so difficult to build. It's an authentic representation of the world based on the methods we use. But starting with narrative and understanding the stories and the mental models, if you will, the understandings that what you say are going to fold into and shape how people understand what you're doing would be really, I guess I'm not saying what not to do anymore, but so I would say orient around that kind of listening-based, narrative-based public engagement model when you're trying to work through these situations.
Thank you all for that. So I've got another question that we've all sort of started touching on, and Madeleine, especially you, and maybe we'll come back to you, and sorry for following up on this, but I think it's really important and something I want to hear a little bit more about. So one of the places that, you know, again, I haven't done a ton of research on the Arctic or the North specifically. Actually, predominantly, a lot of my research has focused on Africa, and similar to a dictum you just mentioned there, we often talk about African solutions to African problems. But I think so often when we address issues in the global north, in the global south, and especially Africa, we do come at these issues from this paternalistic type of attitude, as we've already been alluding to a bit on this panel, where, you know, we come with this funding, we come with these solutions, and try to provide something for the people there. And increasingly, what I've been arguing in a lot of my research is that we, as global citizens, actually have a lot to learn from Africa and Africans about dealing with the kinds of problems that they are being confronted with. So in a similar sense, as we've already been discussing, I mean, what can we learn about from the types of global issues that we are facing outside of the Arctic from those residing in the Arctic? When we're thinking about strengthening the Arctic information environment in relation to and in partnership with people living in the Arctic, with people who are experts and have expertise perhaps in a different way from a lot of us in this room, what can we learn about that in dealing with the other kinds of challenges that we're seeing abroad with regards to information integrity?
So I can tell you one of the things that's been particularly useful is understanding what the other Arctic nations are doing. More often than not, they're significantly further ahead than Canada. I mean, Canada for many decades thought we were a leader on so many different issues in our Arctic, and I can tell you the truth is that we've fallen far, far behind our Arctic partners. So looking at what they're doing with respect to, you know, the investments in infrastructure, the integration of those technologies, the integration of you know, sort of the business sector, the academia, research, investing in their north and seeing those investments realized, you know, building universities in the Arctic, whether it's in Tromsø or in Nuuk, Greenland, a much more sort of integrated approach is something that those countries are beginning to see the real benefits from. And unfortunately in Canada's Arctic, we are more often not have that north-south, you know, sort of relationship and perspective. And sort of we really do need to now look at not only those sort of opportunities for sharing research, which I know, you know, happens with ArcticNet and others, but more than just the research, you know, from a scientific viewpoint, is actually sort of how does that also, you know, ensure that the decisions that we make in Canada's Arctic can be similarly realized, and so that we have a strong, prosperous, secure region that benefits not only those that live there, but also, you know, returns those investments that have been made for the entire country.
Yeah, I might have to refer to my old role as a researcher on this one, but when it comes to different Arctic regional forms of cooperation, I think in many of these, especially within the Arctic Council and within the Barents Area Arctic Council, the issue was solved quite in an effective way, in a way that the engagement with the local populations, with the indigenous people, with the residents of the Arctic was not, if not day-to-day basis, it was still built in to the structures, and it was something that was expected of the forms of cooperation. So I think that is a model also to copy from. I know that it's not the perfect one, but I don't think that if there exists such, but the engagement was there, and I think the engagement was really able to also share the differences between the different Arctics in a way that the situations differ quite drastically between the northern Nordics and to the North American. So I think it was also building a bridge not only within but between the Arctics.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Chris, some thoughts on this?
Yeah, not too much to add, I would say, other than agreeing profoundly with what's been said. It's definitely an issue that we'll have to deal with because we see constantly the ways in which the legacy of colonialism is brought forward through adversarial narratives, and these happen in Brazil, these happen in Africa, these happen here, and the reason those come forward is because they're impactful, because we haven't properly reckoned with the history and present of how we came to be who we are and the way we relate to each other. So I think a good start into addition to what was said is just continuing to inform ourselves about the treaties we have, about the various sovereignties we have, and to be careful about what a reassertion of Canadian sovereignty means without awareness of the history of what it has meant in the past. So I think that's all I would add to what the other speakers have said.
Thank you so much. Please join me in giving a round of applause for this great panel.
As we close this event, I'm sort of thinking of my mother, frankly, who would spend all day Sunday preparing the family meal, only to have her hungry family eat it within a half an hour, and sort of felt ripped off as a result. But I must admit, this has gone very fast. It was a rich amount of information, but I certainly do not feel ripped off. It was a great set of ideas and perspectives coming forward on very complicated issues. So today we've explored the interconnectedness of climate change, security, and disinformation in the Arctic, from the seismic shifts reshaping the region to the influence operations targeting climate narratives in northern communities. Today's discussions have underscored how complex and indeed urgent these challenges are for Canada and our Arctic allies. But they've also made one thing very clear: collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and borders is not only possible, but essential. So I have this remark in my talking points saying, short recap of some of the key themes and speaker points, insert. That's going to be hard to do. So I am going to reassure you before I attempt to do so feebly, is as a result of this conference, we are going to be publishing a paper from the Information Integrity Lab that isn't going to be a summary of proceedings, but rather kind of our take, informed by this conference today, on how all these challenges come together. And we're also sharing our most recent research on mis and disinformation narratives in the Arctic in that paper as well. And this is part of an ongoing program of work that we want to conduct, including in partnership with the Swedish Defense University, who's been a partner on this with us, that also will focus more and more also, how do you factor in the indigenous realities as well, and northern communities, and their unique requirements with respect to the information ecosystem. But in terms of my feeble effort, I would say I think there's a consensus here that the Arctic is at an inflection point. There's a number of challenges coming together. First and foremost, the climate crisis, which, as Dr. Dawson mentioned, the Arctic is experiencing at 4 times the rate of other regions. And what is changing is not only the ecosystem, but also food security, human security, and infrastructure as some of the few implications of that climate crisis. The second is the geopolitical and strategic competition. So part of this is part and parcel of the shifts that are taking place amongst great powers and the competition amongst them over everything from resources to technology to sheer power. But there is an Arctic twist here as well, as the competition includes competition over navigation routes, critical minerals, and other kind of geopolitical realities in the north. We see an alignment of some of the hostile state actors who are perpetrating some of these downstream effects, including especially Russia and China, possibly coming together with common interests, putting the region even at more risk. Alongside, there has been changes in the nature of conflict. So now we see conflict is a combination of kinetic and non-kinetic, with influence operations, information operations having a key role in how conflict is manifesting itself, including in the Arctic. There's also been changes in the information ecosystem, rapidly changing technologies, increased reliance on social media for news, which is already fragmented, a weak digital infrastructure, both to support information sharing and connections with the world. We did hear passionate, I think, bold vision from Vince Rigby that we should be looking at a bold vision for a coordinated multidisciplinary approach that requires resources and also accountability, and needs to be also punctuated with investments, key investments in the Arctic. So how does information distortion fits in? Well, it's part and parcel of the hybrid conflict tactics that we are witnessing in the Arctic. It's also sowing confusion around the nature of the climate crisis and the nature of climate solutions. Part of that is directed against science. We're doing quite a bit of work now about disinformation around science directed against scientists. UNESCO is doing a lot of work now about, trying to protect science communicators. So that's something that remains an ongoing concern. Also draws into question the scientific method by which we understand and have developed our risk assessments, our understanding of scientific issues. And also it distorts our understanding about the realities. In terms of some of the remedies around how we combat mis and disinformation, wasn't a big focus of this conference. We're going to be doing another one probably later on this year that will focus more against measures. But some of the things that came out are things that are already on our radar screen. The importance of making sure that you're increasing science literacy, not just by going after the facts and debunking factual errors, but having a compelling narrative, a compelling evidence-based narrative that includes the same emotion and passion as disinformation propagators are famous for. We also need to increase education about the Arctic, about science, about climate change. I like the idea of just let's read more science publications. And part of that information ecosystem space is that if you're relying on social media and it is distorted or fragmenting, then you're not getting to your people what's necessary for them to understand the realities in which they live. Alongside, to leverage local lived experiences and also traditional knowledge. I think that was a big theme that came out in this panel. Really appreciated that. And then I like also the comments made about that how important framing is. So this confluence of issues that we talked about today has many different faces. And if you choose, the way you choose a face of an issue is the way you frame it. And that framing is by nature biased. So if we don't understand the biases that we're bringing into how we frame the issues, then we are going to be robbed of our ability to do that kind of dispassionate risk assessment that's necessary for us to move forward. Ultimately, that's what it requires, is a non-biased assessment, risk-based, evidence-fed, that can feed into the kind of bold vision for a multidisciplinary coordinated approach that we started off at the conference discussing. Events like this don't happen on their own. I'd first like to take a moment to express and extend a heartfelt congratulations and thank you to Alex DeLille, our Arctic associate at the Information Integrity Lab, who was a driving force for this event, supported by our climate change associate Alan Heffernan, Daniel Nicola at the back, Sonia Abradovich Ward, whose her logistics prowess really came through in this event. We're also grateful for our partners at the Climate Security Association Canada. I'm going to ask Bruno to speak in a moment, but certainly his leadership and the organizational support of his team was instrumental to this event. And of course, our thanks go to D&D Mines for their ongoing support of our Arctic-focused work, their commitment to fostering dialogue on emerging and unconventional security challenges such as information threats in the Arctic contributes greatly to how we understand the evolving Canadian security framework so we can better position ourselves to meet the challenges of the future. Moving forward, I sincerely hope today's conversations will stay with you and will be a catalyst for research, policy engagement, but particularly actions that can kind of support solutions around the different challenges we faced, building on green alliances and coalitions. The Arctic is in flux, and how we respond to those challenges will really be the Canadian security challenge of the future. We invite you all also to register for our Summit on Climate Myths and Disinformation, which is taking place the 19th and 20th of September, where we'll go deeper on many of these different themes. And the Arctic paper that will flow from this will be one of the different inputs to that. So thank you again for coming out. Keep your eyes open for invitations from us to partner as we look at how we apply some of the lessons learned here to our work going forward, including to better understand how we can add resiliency to the people of the North. And now I invite Bruno Charbonneau to say some words. Thank you again, Bruno.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Jennifer, Alex, and the whole team for reaching out and coming to Montreal. This was a great collaboration, and hoping we'll get an invite for September, right?
For sure.
Maybe just to listen and learn from you. I know I'm standing between before your lunch, so I'll be very brief. Just a couple of information points and a few thank yous. So the videos for the 3 days will be available online in, I don't know, a few weeks. There is some editing, translation, and paperwork to do, so it takes a bit of time, but it will be available. We'll probably be working on conference proceedings as well. In terms of CSAC, the Climate Security Association of Canada, so if you're not following us yet, you can sign up to our newsletter, monthly newsletter on a website, and you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. That's where we are at this point. I just want to thank people, everyone first, the Chaire Raoul-Dandurand team, UQAM, Françoise in the back, Daphne, Louis, without whom obviously this sort of thing is absolutely impossible. CSAC team as well, Gabrielle, I think Gabrielle had to leave, but certainly Gabrielle, who managed the mines funding stuff this year, Tom, but also our fellows, Ali and Burgess and Stephanie, who's been helping me for years as well with all sorts of things. So themes, friends, colleagues, that's always, obviously, as you know, this sort of thing is not about a particular person, but always a group, a community. And so my last thank you is to all of you for being here. I know several of you were actually here at 8 a.m. on Monday and are still here. That's quite impressive. I really want to thank you for that. That's absolutely amazing. I hope to see you soon again. CSAC we'll make an announcement. I don't want to promise anything yet, but we have a few projects in next year, new stuff coming up, new events, so I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much again, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.